Okay, listen to this. What if I told you that the greatest lost civilization in human history, a literal technological marvel swallowed by the sea, was completely made up by one guy just to win a political debate? We've all heard the legends, right? Sunken temples, ancient crystal technologies, sprawling underwater empires. But the actual truth behind the myth? It is far more fascinating and way more deliberate than anyone ever realized.
Because here is the crazy part. Every single modern theory, every blockbuster book, and every multi-million-dollar deep-sea expedition traces back to one single person. There are absolutely no ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs depicting this island, no ancient maps. There is literally just one source, and one source alone, in the entire historical record.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to completely deconstruct the ultimate ancient mystery. We're going to strip away thousands of years of rumors, pseudoscientific expeditions, and wild internet conspiracy theories, and we're going to use the actual historical and geological source material to uncover the real Atlantis. So, grab your gear because we are diving deep into the origins of a myth that literally conquered the world.
Chapter 1. The Ultimate Unsolved Mystery.
For centuries, explorers have scoured the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, and honestly, even the ice sheets of Antarctica, desperately looking for any trace of this globally recognized advanced empire. But to understand what they're actually looking for, we first have to understand the epic, cinematic scale of the story itself. The original legend paints this terrifying picture of catastrophic doom. As the ancient Greek philosopher Plato first described it, quote, "There occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared in the depths of the sea." It's just this incredibly dramatic, terrifying image, and it's completely captivated human imagination for over 2 millennia.
But seriously, where did this incredibly detailed story of an advanced island with its massive concentric rings of water, grand palaces, and walls coated in precious metals actually come from? If there is zero archaeological evidence that it ever existed, how did it become the most famous lost city on Earth?
Chapter 2. Tracing this single source.
To answer that, we have to travel all the way back to classical Athens. All roads in the hunt for this sunken empire lead directly to one incredibly influential philosopher and the specific texts he left behind. The very first time Atlantis is ever mentioned in human history is in Plato's Dialogues, specifically the Timaeus and the Critias, written right around 360 BC. Now, Plato framed this as a tale passed down through generations from the Athenian lawmaker Solon, who supposedly heard it from Egyptian priests. But classicists and experts today widely agree on one thing. This was a philosophical fiction. It was a thought experiment, not a history lesson.
And to add this incredible layer of suspense to the whole thing, the story itself is literally an unfinished puzzle. In the Critias dialogue, Plato describes how the people of Atlantis became greedy and corrupt. Zeus, the king of the gods, decides he's going to punish them, and he calls a massive council of the deities. The text literally says Zeus gathered the gods and spake as follows, and then the manuscript just breaks off mid-sentence. We never actually hear what Zeus said.
So if the whole thing is basically an unfinished fiction, and definitely not a real historical record of a sunken continent, what secret message was Plato actually trying to communicate? Why invent this incredibly detailed, ridiculously wealthy naval empire just to sink it to the bottom of the ocean?
Chapter 3. The Hidden Political Allegory.
The answer is actually hidden in the geopolitical tensions of Plato's own time. He was creating a parable of might versus right to decode this philosophical clash between the mighty Atlantis and the prehistoric, virtuous Athenians. Think of it like a giant scale. On one side, you have Atlantis, this greedy, imperialistic, technologically advanced naval superpower that completely lost its moral compass. They represent vice. On the other side, you have prehistoric Athens, a modest, perfectly governed, highly disciplined society, honestly a lot like Sparta, representing virtue. The whole story is just an allegory about how virtue will always defeat corrupt imperial power.
But who is Plato actually criticizing with this story? Well, historians point out he was leveling a really harsh critique at his own contemporary home, 5th century Athens. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens had become an aggressive, wildly wealthy naval empire through the Delian League. Plato wasn't partially holding up a mirror to his own society. He used the fictional Atlantis to warn Athenians about their own extravagant public spending under leaders like Pericles, their aggressive expansionism, and their creeping moral decay.
So basically, Plato was writing a political commentary to tell his fellow citizens to get their act together. But that brings up a really good point. If the city was just a political allegory, just a metaphor, why does the physical destruction,
The massive earthquakes, the tsunamis, the sinking into the mud. Why does that part sound so terrifyingly real and geographically precise?
Chapter 4. The Real Sinking Cities.
See, Plato didn't just pull the cataclysm out of thin air. He was a really keen observer of the world around him. And looking at the timeline of the ancient Aegean, it was a highly active geological zone that handed him some very realistic templates for story. Long before Plato, around 1600 BC, the massive Thera volcano erupted, devastating the Minoan civilization. Then, closer to his own lifetime, the 426 BC Gulf of Atlantis earthquake caused these massive tsunamis. And most notably, in 373 BC, an entire Greek city called Helike was completely swallowed by the sea. Plato wrote his story just a little over a decade after this final, totally shocking event.
35 kilometers. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering estimated height of the ash plume from that Bronze Age Thera eruption. This was the catastrophic explosion that triggered massive tsunamis, wiping out coastal settlements, and severely crippling the highly advanced Minoan civilization on the island of Crete. It's highly likely that the cultural memory of this real-life lost civilization filtered down to Plato and shaped his writing.
But perhaps his most direct inspiration was that 373 BC Helike disaster. Helike was a really prominent Greek city that just so happened to be the absolute center of worship for Poseidon, the very same god Plato says founded Atlantis. In a single winter night, an earthquake and tsunami swallowed Helike whole, preserving its ruins underwater in an inland lagoon. This happened when Plato was in his 50s. It was a fresh, terrifying tragedy that served as the absolutely perfect dramatic climax for his allegory.
So we know Plato's intent, and we know the real terrifying natural disasters that inspired his setting. So how on earth did a philosopher's clear political warning transform into a modern, pseudo-scientific hunt for a literal lost continent? Like, how did we get so incredibly far off track?
Chapter 5. The Birth of a Myth.
Let's look at how centuries of misinterpretation birthed the conspiracy theories and the wild obsession we know today. Because for over 1,000 years, people totally understood Plato's story was just a fable. During the Renaissance, writers like Francis Bacon used the Atlantis concept to write their own utopian literature. But the real shift, that happened in 1882. A populist writer named Ignatius Donnelly published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly completely literalized the myth, arguing that Atlantis was a real physical place that seeded literally all other ancient civilizations, from the Maya to the Egyptians.
Donnelly and other amateur scholars latched on to Plato's intentional dramatic exaggerations, like the claim that Atlantis existed 9,000 years before Solon's time. They misinterpreted these standard literary devices as hard, literal history, and that just opened the floodgates for endless speculation. It turned Atlantis into a catch-all buzzword for any lost civilization, giving rise to wild theories involving everything from extraterrestrials to people looking for tropical sunken cities buried under the ice of Antarctica.
Which leaves us with this final, genuinely profound question to consider today. Are we so blinded by this obsession with finding sunken treasure and lost magical technologies that we are completely ignoring Plato's actual warning? He wasn't giving us a treasure map, he was handing us a mirror. He was warning us that even the greatest, most technologically advanced societies can collapse completely overnight if they lose their moral compass and succumb to greed and hubris. And honestly, looking at the world today, that is a far more important lesson than any lost city could ever teach us.